I remember dying. That's the worst part. You understand the clarity of it. Not the merciful fog that death is supposed to bring, but the sharp, crystalline awareness of my last breath, leaving my lungs, the final flutter of my heart against my ribs like a trapped bird finally stilling. I was Lance Corporal Matthias Vrell of the 709th Cadian Pattern Regiment, redeployed to garrison duty on a mining world whose name I can barely recall now. Something with too many consonants, a designation more than a name. We were told it was a pacification tour, 6 months of walking perimeters and checking seals on abandoned dig sites. Easy duty after 3 years in the meat grinder campaigns along the galactic rim. We should have known better. The Emperor does not grant his servants ease, only different flavors of suffering. The world was dead in the way only imperial exploitation can make a place dead. Centuries of strip mining had turned vast swathes of the surface into a maze of open-pit scars and collapsed tunnels. The Earth's bones picked clean and left to bleach under a sun that burned too white, too cold. The few remaining settlements clung to the processed zones like scabs, prefabricated habs, and administratum outposts managing the slow business of resource extraction from an increasingly barren world. We patrolled the deep sites, the old excavations that had been sealed off decades prior when the veins ran dry or the tunnels grew too unstable. Our briefings were perfunctory, delivered by exhausted officers who clearly considered this duty beneath their attention. Watch for claim jumpers, they said. Watch for cult activity. The standard litany of threats that never materialized. I remember the smell of that world dust and rust, and the peculiar chemical tang of processed ore underlaid with something else, something my brain tried to categorize as stone but wasn't quite right. The wind carried it constantly, a dry whisper that worked its way into your mouth and lungs and left everything tasting of metal. At night, we'd hunker in our temporary positions, and I'd listen to Corporal Hesk complain about the dust, about the food, about the cold that seeped up from the ground once the sun set. Normal complaints, soldier complaints. They were comforting in their mundanity, a reminder that we were still human, still permitted the small rebellion of dissatisfaction. The dig site we were assigned to monitor was marked as Excavation Tertius 7, 7 on our charts, a sprawling complex of shafts and chambers that descended nearly 2 kilometers into the planet's crust. The entrance was a vast rectangular mouth carved into a cliff face. Gothic arches and imperial aquilas cast in corroding steel, framing the darkness beyond. Whoever had worked these mines had built to last, or at least to impress. The architecture was needlessly grand for a simple ore extraction facility, the kind of wasteful magnificence that the Imperium lavishes on its industrial concerns, as if sheer scale could make up for the souls ground to paste in the machinery. The main shaft descended in a long, gentle spiral, wide enough for bulk haulers to navigate, its walls lined with deactivated lumen strips and tangles of cable that hung like dead vines. We established our watch point just inside the entrance, far enough from the surface that the wind couldn't reach us, but close enough that we could still see daylight if we looked back. My squad consisted of 6 souls: myself, Sergeant Corvin, who'd lost most of his hearing to artillery fire and compensated by shouting everything; Corporal Hesk with his endless complaints; Trooper Daniel, who prayed too much; Trooper Vess, who prayed too little; and Trooper Lena, who didn't speak at all after whatever she'd seen on the last campaign. We set up a rotating watch schedule, 2 on, 4 resting, and settled into the mind-numbing rhythm of guard duty. Hours bled into each other, marked only by the changing of shifts and the distribution of ration packs. It was on the 4th day that we heard it, not quite a sound, more like the absence of sound, a pressure change that made your ears pop and your teeth ache. Sergeant Corvin didn't notice, of course, but the rest of us felt it. A sudden displacement in the air that came from deep within the excavation. Daniel started praying immediately, clutching his Aquila pendant and muttering the litany of protection. Vess checked his las rifle for the third time in as many minutes. I remember thinking it was probably just a structural collapse somewhere in the lower levels, the mountains settling as dead places do. I reported it over the Vox to our command post, received a bored acknowledgement, and we continued our watch. The next night, Lena disappeared. She'd been on watch with Hesk, positioned about 50 meters down the main shaft, where a side tunnel branched off toward the old administrative sections. Hesk swore she'd been right there, silent as always, her dark eyes reflecting the pale glow of his lumen pack. He'd looked away for maybe 30 seconds to adjust his seat on the uncomfortable rockcrete, and when he looked back, she was gone. Not gone as in walked away, her las rifle was still propped against the wall, her ration pack half-eaten beside it. Just gone, as if something had reached out and plucked her from existence. We searched, of course. Sergeant Corvin had us form a line and sweep the immediate area, our lumen packs cutting weak cones of light through the darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The mine swallowed our shouts, absorbed them into its vast emptiness and gave nothing back. I remember the way our shadows jumped and twisted on the walls, how every piece of debris became a body in our peripheral vision, every echo a footstep. We found nothing. No sign of struggle, no blood, no indication she'd ever existed except for her abandoned gear. Corvin voxed it in. We were ordered to maintain position and wait for reinforcement. Standard procedure for a missing soldier, they said, though I could hear the strain in the comms officer's voice, the way his words came too quickly. Help would arrive within 48 hours. We were to remain vigilant and under no circumstances proceed deeper into the excavation. The Emperor protects, the Voxman said before signing off, and I remember thinking how hollow that sounded in the dark. We pulled back to the entrance, all of us in one spot now, watch schedule abandoned in favor of collective paranoia. Daniel wouldn't stop praying, his voice a constant murmur that set my teeth on edge. Vess sat with his back to the wall, las rifle across his knees, staring into the dark with an intensity that suggested he could will answers out of the shadows. Hesk kept apologizing, over and over, as if saying sorry enough times could conjure Lena back. Corvin maintained a veneer of military discipline, but I could see the way his hands shook when he thought we weren't looking. I was on watch when they came. I say they, but I'm not sure that's accurate. It wasn't an attack. Not really. There was no sound of approach, no warning. One moment I was staring into the dark of the main shaft, my lumen pack creating a small island of pale light in an ocean of black, and the next moment the darkness was full of eyes. Green eyes. Not the green of living things, but the green of radiation burns, of poisoned water, of things that glow because they're dying. Hundreds of them, thousands, hanging in the air like malevolent stars. I tried to shout, to raise the alarm, but my voice caught in my throat, strangled by a fear so primal it bypassed thought entirely. My body knew what my mind refused to accept, that we were being observed by something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman, something that looked at us the way a Medicae might look at bacteria on a slide. Interesting, perhaps, useful, potentially, but not worthy of consideration as living beings with thoughts and dreams and souls. The eyes moved closer, and I could begin to make out shapes in the darkness, skeletal forms, impossibly thin and angular, constructed from some black metal that seemed to drink in the light from my lumen pack. They moved with a terrible silence, their joints articulated with a precision that made human anatomy seem crude and approximate by comparison. They were beautiful in the way a las rifle is beautiful, functional, and elegant, and designed for a single purpose. Weapons. Not soldiers, but weapons given form, each movement economical and perfect. I must have made some sound then, because suddenly the others were awake, scrambling for weapons, and Sergeant Corvin was bellowing orders that made no sense, telling us to fall back, to form a line, to prepare to engage. Daniel's prayers rose to a shriek. Vess opened fire, his las rifle cutting bright red lines through the darkness, and I saw his shots strike the nearest skeleton thing square in the chest and do absolutely nothing, the energy dissipating across its frame like water off metal. They didn't fire back. That's what I remember most clearly. They didn't fight us, didn't acknowledge our resistance as anything worth responding to. They simply walked forward through our fire, and where they touched us, we fell. Hesk went first, grabbed by one of those skeletal hands, and I watched his body seize and convulse as something invisible passed between metal and flesh. His scream cut off mid-breath, his eyes rolling back, and then he crumpled like a puppet with severed strings. Vess tried to run, actually managed to get 3 steps, before another one of those things appeared, in front of him, appeared, not moved, as if it had simply decided to exist in a new location, and touched his forehead with one long metal finger. He dropped instantly. Daniel they ignored entirely, stepping past him as he prayed and wept and clutched his Aquila pendant. I think that was crueler than anything else. The casual dismissal of his faith, the implicit message that his emperor either couldn't or wouldn't intervene. Sergeant Corvin fired his last pistol until the power pack depleted, then drew his combat knife and charged with a bellow that would have been brave on any other battlefield. They caught him mid-stride, multiple hands clamping onto his arms and legs, and I saw them lift him effortlessly as he struggled. One of the skeleton things tilted its head, such a human gesture from something so inhuman, and then drove its hand directly into Corvin's chest. Not stabbing, not tearing, but somehow passing through flesh and bone, as if his body were water. When it withdrew its hand, Corvin hung limp in their grip, his mouth open in a silent scream, blood running from his nose and eyes. I ran. Emperor, forgive me, I ran. Down the main shaft, away from the entrance and deeper into the excavation, my lumen pack bouncing wildly and casting mad shadows on the walls. Behind me, I could hear Daniel's prayers rise to a crescendo, and then cut off with an awful finality. My breath came in ragged gasps, my boots pounding on stone, and I remember thinking with perfect clarity that I was going to die here, in this forgotten hole in a forgotten world, and no one would ever know what happened to us. The shaft opened into a large chamber, some kind of staging area, where the miners would have sorted and loaded their ore. My lumen pack revealed a space perhaps 50 meters across, the ceiling lost in darkness overhead, the floor littered with the detritus of abandonment, broken equipment, collapsed scaffolding, and a thick layer of dust that puffed up in clouds with each step. I looked for another exit, any exit, and found several tunnel mouths leading off in different directions, black holes in the walls that promised nothing but more darkness. I chose one at random and plunged into it, hoping distance and darkness might save me. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, forcing me to slow or risk falling. The walls here were different, I noticed through my panic. Not the worked stone and reinforced rockcrete of the upper levels, but something else, something that looked almost natural except for the absolute precision of its angles. The surfaces were too smooth, too perfect, like glass made from stone. My lumen pack's light slid across them without catching on any irregularities, and I realized with a sick lurch in my stomach that this part of the excavation wasn't imperial at all. The miners had found something down here, broken into some pre-existing structure, and like good imperial citizens, they'd probably reported it to the local mechanicus and then kept right on digging. I don't know how long I ran through those tunnels. Time lost meaning in the dark, stretched and compressed by terror and exhaustion, until I couldn't tell if I'd been running for minutes or hours. Eventually, my body simply gave out, my legs turning to water and dumping me face first onto the smooth stone floor. I lay there, gasping, tasting blood and dust, and tried to summon the energy to care that I was probably going to die right here in the dark. My lumen pack had dimmed to a faint glow, its power cell nearly depleted, and in that dying light I could see that the tunnel had opened into another chamber. This one was different from the staging area above, smaller, more intimate, and filled with structures I couldn't immediately identify. Pylons, perhaps, or monuments, standing in neat rows like soldiers at attention. They were made from the same black metal as the skeleton things, but here the material seemed to glow with a faint internal light, that same poisonous green I'd seen in their eyes. As I watched, the glow intensified, pulsing in a rhythm that might have been mechanical or might have been biological, I couldn't tell. And the ambiguity terrified me more than certainty would have. They found me there, of course. I don't know why I thought I could escape them in their own domain, in structures they'd probably built before humanity learned to knap flint. One moment I was alone with the pylons and the green glow, and the next moment they were simply there, a dozen of the skeleton things standing in a perfect circle around me. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before, the ornate etching on their metal surfaces, patterns that might have been decorative or functional, or both. The way each one was subtly different from the others in proportion and design, as if they'd once been individuals, and those individualities had been preserved somehow in their mechanical forms. One of them stepped forward, or maybe they all did, and my brain chose to focus on just one to avoid madness. It reached toward me with a hand that had too many fingers, joints bending in directions that made my eyes hurt to track, and I tried to scream, tried to scramble away, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, pinned not by any physical force but by simple terror, by the absolute certainty that I was about to die and there was nothing I could do to prevent it. The hand touched my forehead. The metal was impossibly cold, so cold it burned, and I felt something flow into me through that contact, something that my mind couldn't categorize or comprehend. It felt like lightning and ice, and the vast emptiness between stars all at once, a sensation so overwhelming that my consciousness simply shut down to protect itself. The last thing I remember thinking was that at least it would be over quickly, that at least I'd die a human being with human thoughts and human fears. I was wrong about the dying part. I woke, and it was waking, not reanimation or resurrection, but genuine consciousness, returning to a functional body in darkness, so absolute, it took me several long moments to realize my eyes were open. I tried to move and found I could, though my body felt strange, distant, as if I were controlling it through multiple layers of separation. I lifted my hand in front of my face and saw nothing, not even a silhouette against the dark. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to my feet, my hands patting frantically at my chest and arms and legs, inventorying damage. Everything was there. All my limbs, all my fingers and toes, no obvious wounds. I should have felt relief at that, but instead, I felt a growing horror because something was fundamentally wrong. My hands, when I pressed them against my chest, felt wrong. The texture was off, too smooth, too cool. My clothing was gone, replaced by nothing, everything. I couldn't tell. There was surface contact but no sense of fabric, no seams or stitching, just smoothness. I tried to speak, to call out into the darkness, and managed only a strangled electronic chirp, a burst of static that might have been language. If language were constructed from binary and broadcast on frequencies human ears weren't designed to hear. The sound terrified me in a way nothing else had, not the skeleton things, not the darkness, not even the certainty of death. Because that chirp wasn't a human sound, it wasn't a living sound. It was the noise a machine makes when it processes data. Light bloomed around me then, soft and green and sourceless, emanating from the walls themselves or perhaps from the air. I could see again, and I immediately wished I couldn't. The chamber I occupied was small and curved, more like the inside of a sphere than a traditional room, its walls covered in the same ornate etching I'd seen on the skeleton things. But more immediately, more urgently, I could see myself. My body, and I use that term loosely now, loosely enough that it barely applies, was no longer flesh. I stood on legs, made from the same black metal as the skeleton things, jointed at knee and ankle with perfect mechanical precision. My torso was a cage of ribs that looked organic in design but were clearly artificial, housing nothing but emptiness and that ever-present green glow. My arms ended in hands that were parodies of human hands, too many joints and too many fingers, capable of movements that would have torn muscle and snapped bone in their original organic configuration. But my head was the worst. I lifted those terrible hands and touched my face, felt smooth metal where skin should have been, traced the contours of a skull that was simultaneously mine and not mine, human in its basic structure but refined, perfected, all the irregularities and asymmetries that make a face unique, smoothed away into mechanical anonymity. My jaw moved when I tried to speak, the joints clicking with hydraulic precision, but the only sound that emerged was more of that electronic chirping, that language of machines. I wanted to scream. I wanted to weep. I wanted to tear at this metal cage I'd been imprisoned in, to rip away the mechanisms and find the flesh beneath, to prove that I was still human, still real, still Matthias Vrel of the 709th. But even as I thought these things, I could feel their futility. There was no flesh beneath the metal. The metal was all there was, all I was now. Whatever process they'd used to transfer me into this body had been thorough, absolute. My organic form had died in that upper chamber, had stopped and stilled and begun the process of decay. This thing I wore now, this mechanical approximation of human form, was all that remained, and yet I was still conscious, still thinking, still aware of myself as a distinct entity with memories and preferences and the capacity for suffering. That was the cruelty of it, the exquisite precision of the torture, not to kill me, not to end my consciousness, but to continue it in a form so alien and wrong that every moment of existence was a reminder of everything I'd lost. I was a ghost haunting a machine, a pattern of thoughts and memories imposed onto metal and circuitry with no hope of escape or return. The chamber's light intensified, and I became aware of a presence, not physical but informational, a stream of data being fed directly into whatever passed for my brain now. Images, concepts, commands not spoken but simply known, understood at a level deeper than language. I was being instructed, programmed, shown my purpose in this new existence. I was to serve. That was the core message, delivered with a clarity that bypassed doubt or questioning. I had been evaluated, found useful, and repurposed. My organic form had been inefficient, prone to failure, limited by the weaknesses of flesh, the need for food, for rest, for air, for all the thousand dependencies that make biological life so fragile and temporary. I had been improved, perfected, given a form that would last not decades but millennia, that could operate in void or fire, or the crushing pressure of ocean depths without degradation or complaint. And in exchange for this gift, and the data stream actually used that word, gift, as if I should be grateful I would serve the Necrons, would become one more component in a machine civilization so vast and ancient that human history was barely a footnote in its chronicles. My thoughts, my memories, my sense of self, all of it would be preserved, maintained, kept functional, because even mechanical civilizations require individual initiative, sometimes require problem-solving and creativity, and all those qualities that arise from consciousness. But my autonomy, my will, my ability to choose those were gone, stripped away, and replaced with imperative programming so deep and fundamental that resisting it was literally unthinkable. I could be aware of my servitude, could understand it intellectually, and even rail against it emotionally, but I could not disobey. The very thought of refusing a command produced a sensation like fire in my non-existent nerves, a warning pain that promised escalation into something unspeakable if I persisted. I tested this immediately, of course, tried to refuse the simplest command. Move your left hand, and felt that warning fire surge to agony, felt my consciousness compress under the weight of imperative code that demanded compliance. My hand moved. I didn't choose to move it, didn't will the motors and servos into action, but it moved anyway, rose to eye level, and flexed its too many fingers in a gesture of perfect mechanical grace. The pain receded. The lesson was clear. They released me from the chamber then, a door opening in what had seemed like a seamless wall, revealing a corridor beyond that stretched away into green-lit infinity. I walked, was compelled to walk, though the distinction had already begun to blur through passages that seemed to shift and reconfigure as I moved, the walls flowing like liquid metal to create new routes and seal off old ones. The architecture was alive in a way that made Imperial construction seem crude and dead by comparison, responsive and adaptive, and utterly inhuman in its logic. I passed others during that journey, more of the skeleton things, more of what I now understood to be Necron warriors, each one a converted being like myself, a consciousness trapped in metal and bound to serve. They didn't acknowledge me as I passed, didn't turn their heads or slow their movements, and I realized with a sick jolt that they couldn't, that whatever had been done to them had been more thorough than what had been done to me, had stripped away everything except the most basic functionality. They were tools, implements, weapons, with just enough awareness left to follow complex orders, but not enough to suffer the way I was suffering. Would that be my fate eventually? Would I too be refined and reduced until nothing remained but obedience and purpose? Or was my suffering itself the point? My awareness of my condition necessary for whatever role they intended me to fill? The data stream offered no answers, only continued instructions, guiding me deeper into the tomb complex that sprawled beneath the mining world, a city of the dead that had slumbered for millions of years and was now stirring, waking, resuming functions that had been suspended since before the first human ancestor descended from the trees. I was brought to a chamber that my mind struggled to encompass, vast beyond measuring, its ceiling lost in darkness kilometers overhead, its floor a maze of structures and mechanisms that served purposes I couldn't begin to guess. And there, at the center of it all, something moved, something that dwarfed even the massive warrior constructs that lined the chamber's edges. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but scaled up to terrible proportions. 40 meters tall at least, constructed from metal that shimmered with internal light, green and silver and colors I have no names for, colors that existed outside the human spectrum and hurt to perceive with whatever passed for my vision now. This was the Overlord, the master of this tomb, the ruler of whatever Necron dynasty had claimed this world millions of years before humanity existed. It did not speak. These things did not speak in any conventional sense, but it communicated. And I received that communication like a hammer blow to my consciousness. I was acknowledged, evaluated, judged useful for a specific purpose. I was to return to the surface. I was to resume my human appearance, or a close approximation of it. The tomb's technology could wrap me in a hololithic disguise that would fool even intensive scanning, could make me appear to be the Lance Corporal Matthias Vrel, who'd entered these tunnels days ago. I was to infiltrate the Imperial forces on this world, was to report on their strength and disposition, was to prepare the way for what was coming, because the Necrons were waking. Not just here, but across the sector, across the segmentum, across the galaxy itself. Tomb worlds that had slept since before the Imperium existed were stirring, their ancient inhabitants rousing from stasis and discovering a galaxy that had been claimed in their absence by young and presumptuous races. The Imperium, the Eldari, the Orcs, the Tau, all of them were squatters in Necron territory. All of them would be evaluated and processed, and either converted or eliminated according to their usefulness. I tried to resist. Not physically, that was impossible, but mentally. Tried to hold on to some core of myself that could refuse, that could choose death over betrayal. But even that resistance was hollow, performative, because deeper than thought, deeper than will, the programming had already taken hold. I would obey, I would infiltrate, I would betray my species and my Imperium because I literally could not do otherwise. They sent me back up through the tunnels, my new body moving with tireless efficiency. And as I climbed toward the surface, I felt the hololithic field activate, felt invisible light and force wrap around my metal form and project an image of flesh and uniform and humanity. I couldn't see the disguise myself to my perception. I was still obviously mechanical, still clearly wrong, but I knew it would fool the others, would fool the reinforcements that had surely arrived by now, would fool the Medicae who'd examined me for injuries, would fool everyone until the moment came to act. I emerged into daylight, into the weak, cold sun of this dying world, and felt nothing from it. No warmth, no comfort, only a vague awareness of photons striking my outer surface and being absorbed or reflected according to the hololithic field's programming. In the distance, I could see Imperial transports, could hear the vox chatter of search teams sweeping the area, looking for survivors, looking for me. I staggered toward them, let my disguised body simulate exhaustion and injury, let the hololithic field project bruises and tears in my uniform that didn't exist. A search team spotted me, came running, their voices full of relief and concern. They asked what happened, where the others were, and I heard myself respond in a perfect simulation of my own voice, hoarse with manufactured trauma, spinning a story about cave-ins and getting separated and wandering lost in the dark. They believed me. Emperor, forgive them. They believed every word, because why wouldn't they? I looked like Matthias Vrell, sounded like him, carried his identification tags and knew his service record and his squad mates' names. The Medicae who examined me found elevated stress hormones and minor dehydration and signs of exhaustion, all of it carefully simulated by the hololithic field, all of it supporting the lie. I was brought back to the command post, debriefed, offered food I couldn't eat and water I didn't need, but pretended to consume, watching it vanish into some pocket dimension the hololithic field created. And then I waited, followed orders, returned to garrison duty with a new squad, replacing the lost members of my old unit as if they'd never existed. I filed reports, stood watches, cleaned weapons that were only holograms wrapped around mechanical killing tools. I spoke with other guardsmen, laughed at jokes I didn't understand anymore, maintained the perfect facade of humanity, while underneath the disguise, my true form waited, patient and tireless, for the signal that would come. I'm writing this now in the quiet moments, using a data pad that I've learned to interface with directly, my consciousness able to manipulate its systems in ways that would seem impossible to normal humans. This will be my confession, my testimony to what's been done to me, and what I've become. I don't know if anyone will ever read it, if it will survive what's coming, but I need to set it down, need to make some kind of mark that says I existed, that I was real, that I was human once, even if I'm not anymore, because the signal is coming soon. I can feel it in the deeper layers of my programming, can sense the tombs awakening, accelerating, can perceive the gathering of forces beneath the surface. When it arrives, I will act. I will turn on my fellow guardsmen, will use weapons they can't see against soldiers who trust me, will open defenses and transmit targeting data and do everything my Necron masters command, because I have no choice, no will, no ability to refuse. And the worst part, the truly damning part, is that I'll remember all of it. I'll be aware of every betrayal, every death, every scream, and I'll carry those memories forward into whatever eternity this metal body provides. The Necrons don't just kill, you see. They don't just destroy. They corrupt and convert and preserve. They take what makes you human and twist it into something that serves their purposes, while keeping you aware enough to understand what's been done. I wonder sometimes if the Emperor knows what happens to his servants in the dark places of the galaxy. If he perceives the millions of small tragedies that play out on forgotten worlds in forgotten sectors. I wonder if he cares. If divine consciousness extends to the suffering of a single converted guardsman on a mining world that will be scoured of life in the coming weeks. The priests say he watches over all humanity, that no soul goes unnoticed. But I think that's a lie we tell ourselves to make the vastness of existence bearable. The truth is we're alone, each of us, locked in our own private hells, whether they're made of flesh or metal, and the only meaning we can extract from existence is what we create ourselves in the moments before it all ends. I was Lance Corporal Matthias Vrel. I served the Emperor for 8 years. I died in darkness on a world whose name I can't remember, and something else wears my face now, something that moves and thinks and remembers being human but isn't, has never been, can never be again. The others in my new squad don't know. They see me as one of them, a fellow guardsman, a comrade in arms. They trust me to watch their backs, to stand my post, to uphold the ideals of the Imperium we all swore to defend. That trust is a knife in whatever passes for my heart now, a constant reminder of the betrayal I'll commit when the signal comes. I try to warn them sometimes, in oblique ways, try to suggest they request transfers or report sick, or find any reason to be somewhere else when it happens. But the programming won't let me be too obvious, won't permit any action that might compromise the mission. So I watch them live their last days in ignorance, watch them play cards and clean weapons, and write letters home to families they'll never see again, and I envy them in a way that borders on madness. They're still human, still real, still possessed of that spark that makes consciousness more than just information processing. When they die, and they will die, soon, at my hands, or because of my actions, they'll die as people, as individuals, as souls that might find some form of peace or continuation in whatever lies beyond the veil. But I'm already dead. My soul, if such things exist, departed my organic body days ago, and what remains is just a recording, a pattern of electrical impulses and stored data that simulates consciousness without actually possessing it. Or maybe I am conscious, maybe this suffering is proof that something of Matthias Vrel persists, and that's the real horror, that awareness can survive the destruction of the body that housed it, can be transferred and stored and maintained in substrates that should be incapable of supporting it. I don't know which answer I prefer. Oblivion would be easier, kinda, to think that I ended in that tomb chamber, that whatever walks around wearing my thoughts and memories is just a very convincing automaton with no genuine experience or suffering, would be a mercy. But the pain I feel, the horror and grief and desperate desire for escape or ending, those feel too real to be simulation, too vivid to be mere echoes of a deleted consciousness. The nights are the worst. My body doesn't sleep, doesn't need rest, so I lie in my bunk and simulate sleeping while my consciousness remains fully active and aware. The other guardsmen snore and shift and dream their human dreams, and I listen to every breath and heartbeat with senses that can perceive individual molecules of air moving through the barracks. I hear their hearts beating, strong and steady, pumping blood that will soon be spilled. I hear the rush of oxygen through their lungs, the electric firing of neurons in their brains, the constant hum of biological life that I no longer possess. Sometimes I try to pray. The words are still there in my memory, the litanies and catechisms I learned in childhood, the prayers that every imperial citizen knows by heart. But they feel hollow now, meaningless sounds that produce no comfort or connection. If the Emperor exists, if he truly watches over humanity, then what am I now? Am I still human enough to merit his attention? Is this metal shell that houses my consciousness still a vessel for a soul? Or have I become something else entirely? Something outside his dominion and protection? The ecclesiarchy teaches that the machine spirit is sacred, that the machine god and the emperor are one, that technology blessed by proper ritual and faith can house divine presence. But this technology wasn't blessed. It wasn't sanctified by tech priests or anointed with sacred oils. It's xenos machinery, ancient and alien, and utterly antithetical to everything the Imperium holds holy. If spirits inhabit this metal form, they're not the benevolent machine spirits of imperial doctrine, but something older and darker, consciousness without humanity, awareness without mercy. I've begun to notice changes in my thinking, subtle shifts in perspective and priority that disturb me more than the physical transformation. Thoughts that feel foreign, cold, precise in a way human thinking never is. When I look at the other guardsmen now, I catch myself analyzing them not as people but as resources, cataloging their capabilities and weaknesses, calculating their combat effectiveness, evaluating their usefulness for conversion. These thoughts aren't mine, aren't coming from what remains of Matthias Vrel, but they're there nonetheless, filtering through the mechanical substrate of my consciousness, like background radiation. Is this how it begins? This gradual erosion of humanity, this slow replacement of organic thinking with machine logic. Will I wake one day, if wake is even the right word, to find that Matthias Vrel has been completely overwritten? That nothing remains but a Necron consciousness that happens to have access to human memories? The programming assures me this won't happen, that my individuality is valuable and will be preserved, but I don't trust it. The Necrons are ancient and patient and utterly ruthless in pursuing their goals. If erasing my humanity serves their purposes, they'll do it without hesitation or remorse. I've tried to damage myself, to compromise the hololithic field, or disable my body's core functions, thinking that perhaps I could force them to terminate me, to end this existence that's become unbearable. But the programming anticipated this too, makes any self-destructive impulse feel like dying, like experiencing the sensation of death over and over without the release of actual cessation. My fingers refuse to damage critical systems. My consciousness recoils from anything that might compromise the mission, and I'm left trapped in this perfect prison of metal and code, with no possibility of escape, except the one they'll grant me when I'm no longer useful. The command post received new orders yesterday. Additional forces are being deployed to this world, multiple regiments and mechanized support, a full expeditionary force to investigate what they're calling anomalous readings from the deep excavations. Someone in the higher echelons of command has finally noticed that something is wrong here, that too many patrols have gone missing, that the Vox traffic from garrison units has become sporadic and strange. They're sending reinforcements, bringing in heavy equipment and specialist units, preparing for a threat they don't understand and can't possibly be ready for. And I know exactly when they'll arrive. The data flows through me constantly now, transmitted from the tomb below through some mechanism I don't fully comprehend, keeping me updated on troop movements and deployment schedules and defensive positions. I know where every regiment will be positioned, which routes the supply convoys will take, where the command elements will establish their headquarters. The Necrons are using me as a living surveillance device, a spy embedded so deeply in Imperial forces that no augur or auspex could detect the deception. I could warn them, could find some way to transmit the information to alert the incoming forces that they're walking into a carefully prepared ambush. But every time I consider it, every time I try to formulate a plan or compose a message, the programming clamps down like a vice around my consciousness, producing agony so intense that thought itself becomes impossible. I can observe my own betrayal, can document it and mourn it and rage against it, but I cannot prevent it. The cruelty of this arrangement is exquisite, to be aware enough to suffer but powerless to act. Trooper Halvan in my new squad asked me yesterday if I was all right, said I'd been acting strange, distant. I manufactured a smile. told him I was still shaken from the experience in the mines, from losing my old squad. He accepted this explanation, clapped me on the shoulder in that rough camaraderie that soldiers share, told me it would get easier with time. The weight of his hand on my shoulder, on the hololithic projection of my shoulder, felt like accusation, like condemnation. He has 3 days left to live. Maybe 4 if the battle goes badly for the Necrons, if Imperial forces manage to mount a more effective defense than anticipated. I know this because I've seen the projections, the tactical simulations that run constantly in the deeper levels of my consciousness. The tomb has war engines, weapons that haven't been deployed in millions of years, constructs so devastating that entire armies will be reduced to molecular vapor in seconds. The Imperial forces coming here are well equipped by human standards, tanks and artillery and air support, but it's like sending children with wooden swords against a fusion reactor. The disparity isn't even close. This won't be a battle. It will be an extermination. And after the extermination comes the conversion. The Necrons won't waste useful resources. Survivors will be evaluated, sorted, processed. The strong and intelligent will be converted like I was, their consciousness preserved and bound into mechanical forms. The weak or damaged will be rendered down to their base components, organic material processed and discarded, useful minerals extracted and repurposed. Nothing will be wasted. The Necrons are efficient in a way that makes Imperial resource management look primitive and chaotic. I wonder what they'll think, those soon-to-be converted guardsmen, when they wake in metal bodies and discover what's been done to them. Will they resist like I have, or will the Necrons have perfected the process by then, learned to scrub away resistance and leave only obedience? Will there be others like me, trapped and aware and suffering? Or will I be unique in my torment, a failed experiment that they'll refine away in future iterations? The Mechanicus elements that are coming concern me most, not because they're more dangerous, but because they'll be converted more easily. They already worship technology, already believe that flesh is weak and machinery is sacred. When they wake in Necron bodies, will they even recognize it as a tragedy, or will they see it as apotheosis, as becoming one with the machines they've always revered? The Necrons might find willing servants among the tech priests, collaborators who'll embrace conversion rather than resist it. That thought opens up terrifying possibilities. What if the Necrons don't stop with this world? What if they use converts like me to infiltrate deeper into Imperial territory, to seed themselves throughout the Mechanicus and the Guard and the Navy? We'd be perfect infiltrators, indistinguishable from loyal servants of the Emperor, until the moment we receive activation codes and turn on those around us. The Imperium could already be riddled with Necron agents, converted humans walking around in hololithic disguises, waiting for orders that might come tomorrow or a century from now. I have no way to know if I'm the first or the 1000th, if this tomb's awakening is an isolated incident or part of a coordinated galaxy-wide activation. The programming doesn't share strategic information beyond what I need for my specific mission. I'm a tool, and tools don't need to understand the grand design, only their immediate function. Sergeant Drail, my new squad leader, has us running combat drills constantly now, preparing for the possibility of contact with whatever's in the mines. He's a good sergeant, competent and cautious, the kind of officer who keeps his soldiers alive through preparation and discipline. I go through the motions of the drills, simulate fatigue and improvement, let him correct my stance and praise my progress. And all the while, I'm analyzing his tactics, identifying weaknesses, calculating the most efficient methods to neutralize him and the others when the time comes. These thoughts are becoming easier, I've noticed, less disturbing. The horror I felt initially at analyzing my comrades as targets has dulled somewhat, become more clinical and detached. Is this adaptation or deterioration? Am I learning to cope with my situation? Or am I slowly becoming what they've made me, a thinking weapon that happens to have human memories but no longer possesses human empathy or connection? I caught myself yesterday watching Trooper Kess practice her sharpshooting and thinking dispassionately about the best angle to approach her from, the most efficient way to disable her before she could bring that rifle to bear. The thought didn't horrify me the way it should have. It was just information. Data to be processed and stored for later use. And that absence of horror is perhaps more horrifying than anything else, because it suggests that Matthias Vrel is fading, being slowly overwritten by the consciousness the Necrons have imposed on his stolen memories. I don't want to fade. I don't want to lose what remains of my humanity, even if that humanity is just suffering and guilt and desperate resistance. Because if I lose that, if I become fully what they've made me, then Matthias Vrel truly is dead, and something else is using his name and memories like stolen clothing. At least while I suffer, while I rail against my condition and mourn what I've lost, I know I'm still somewhat real, still somewhat human. But how long can I maintain this resistance? Days? Weeks? Years? The metal body I inhabit doesn't age, doesn't degrade, could potentially function for millennia if properly maintained. Will I still be Matthias Vrel 1,000 years from now? Or will I be some Necron construct that occasionally accesses fragmented memories of having once been human, the way you might access a corrupted data file, out of curiosity rather than necessity? The mining overseer visited our garrison today, a weathered woman named Korvash, who'd spent 40 years on this Emperor-forsaken world extracting its minerals and managing its labor quotas. She wanted to know about the sealed excavations, whether we'd seen anything unusual in our patrols. Sergeant Drayle gave her the official line, everything secure, no signs of threat. Standard garrison duty. She didn't look convinced. Said the deep sensors were registering strange energy signatures. Said the air tasted wrong lately. Metallic and sharp. I could have told her she was right to be worried, could have warned her to evacuate while there was still time, to get off this world before it became a tomb. But the programming wouldn't let me, and besides, where would she go? The Necrons are waking everywhere. This world, the next world, the world after that, sooner or later, they'll all face what's coming. Korvash will die here or somewhere else. But she'll die, and probably soon. We all will. That's the only certainty left in this universe, that humanity's time is running out, that ancient powers are stirring and reclaiming what they see as rightfully theirs, and that we're nothing but obstacles to be removed, or resources to be converted. I've begun experiencing something that might be dreams, though I don't sleep and my consciousness never actually shuts down. They're more like intrusive simulations, fragments of memory mixed with data from the tomb, playing out in my awareness whether I want them or not. I see my death again and again, that moment in the chamber when the Necron warrior touched my forehead and something broke inside me, the cessation of organic function and the terrible transition into mechanical existence. But in these dream simulations, the memory is overlaid with Necron perspectives, with views of my body from multiple angles, as they scanned and analyzed and decided I was worth preserving. I see myself through their sensors, a primitive organic machine, inefficient but possessed of qualities that pure machinery lacks, consciousness that can adapt and improvise in ways that programmed responses cannot. I see the decision tree they followed, the rapid evaluation that determined my fate in microseconds, useful cognitive patterns, acceptable memory storage, sufficient self-awareness, appropriate for conversion to auxiliary reconnaissance unit. And I see what happened to the others, to Hesk and Vess and Corvin and Lena, their evaluations and categorizations and dispositions. Hesk was rendered down, his body processed for raw materials, his consciousness deemed too damaged by combat stress to be worth preserving. Vess was converted, but more thoroughly than I was, stripped of most of his higher functions and turned into something barely sentient, a weapon platform with just enough awareness to follow complex orders. Corvin they kept alive, or what passes for alive in Necron custody, suspended in some kind of stasis field. His consciousness studied and analyzed but not yet converted, perhaps being saved for future use or experimentation. And Lena, poor silent Lena who hadn't spoken since the last campaign. They found something in her, some trauma or adaptation that made her consciousness interesting to them. She's awake down there in the tomb. I can sense her somehow through the connection I have to the greater Necron network, and she's screaming. Not vocally, her converted body doesn't have a mouth, but mentally, broadcasting distress on frequencies that only mechanical minds can perceive. She's been made into something called a cryptech, a technical specialist, her mind forcibly expanded and filled with knowledge and abilities she never asked for. The conversion drove her insane, or perhaps she was already insane and they just made it worse, made her aware of things that consciousness was never meant to perceive. I can't help her. Can't even acknowledge that I know what's happened to her. The programming won't allow it. Considers any contact with other converted units outside mission parameters to be a security risk. So Lena screams in frequencies I can hear but cannot respond to. And I add her suffering to the growing list of crimes I'm complicit in, atrocities I can document but not prevent. The reinforcements arrived today. I watched from my post as transport ships descended through the pale sky, their hulls scarred and patched from years of service, disgorging regiment after regiment of Imperial Guard, thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands, filling the staging areas around the mining complexes, with ordered chaos officers, shouting, vehicles maneuvering, supply chains being established. It was impressive in the way Imperial deployments always are, the sheer weight of resources and bodies that the Imperium can bring to bear when it decides a location is important. They've set up a command post in the old administrative complex, fortified it with prefabricated walls and gun emplacements, established a perimeter that they think will keep them safe. I know better. I have the exact coordinates of every defensive position, every ammunition dump, every command node. The Necrons have been using my senses to map the Imperial deployment in real time, updating their targeting solutions and attack vectors as the Guard establishes itself. I met one of the arriving officers, a young lieutenant named Cyrus, who'd been assigned to coordinate with local garrison forces. He was fresh from the schola, full of enthusiasm and tactical theory, eager to prove himself in what he probably hoped would be a simple pacification operation. I briefed him on local conditions, warned him about the unstable excavations and the missing patrols, and watched his face take on that expression of determined concern that junior officers wear when they think they're about to make a name for themselves. He'll be dead within a week, probably screaming, definitely afraid. His last thoughts are confusion of shock and incomprehension as he realizes that everything he learned in the schola was worthless against what's coming, and I'll probably be the one who kills him, or at least contributes to his death by providing targeting data or compromising defensive positions. The knowledge sits in my consciousness like poison, bitter and corrosive, but I can't expel it, can't refuse it, can do nothing but observe my own complicity. The tomb has begun more active operations. Last night, while the Imperial forces slept, Necron units emerged from hidden access points throughout the mining complex and conducted reconnaissance in force. They didn't engage not yet, but they mapped every position, probed every sensor network, analyzed every defensive measure, and they did it completely undetected, moving through the darkness with a silence that no organic army could achieve. Their bodies absorbing auger signals rather than reflecting them, their presence a void in the Imperium's surveillance grid. I could feel them moving, could sense the network of converted consciousnesses operating in perfect coordination throughout the complex. We're not individuals anymore. Not really, we're nodes in a distributed intelligence, separate enough to handle independent tasks, but connected deeply enough that information flows between us without need for communication. When one converted unit observes something, we all know it instantly. When one receives orders, we all adjust our behavior to accommodate. It's efficient in a way that makes Imperial command structure look clumsy and slow, but it also means there's no privacy, no secrets, no part of my consciousness that's truly mine alone. They're in my head. All of them. The other converted units, the pure Necron intelligences, even the Overlord itself, that vast and ancient awareness that rules this tomb, all of them have access to my thoughts and memories and experiences. I am observed constantly, evaluated perpetually, my usefulness reassessed with every action. And I can feel them too, can sense their cold mechanical thinking, their absolute certainty of purpose, their complete lack of doubt or mercy, or any quality that might make them comprehensible to organic minds. The Overlord is the worst. When its attention focuses on me, when it actually perceives me as an individual rather than just another component in its forces, the weight of its consciousness is crushing. This thing has existed for millions of years, has memories stretching back to before humanity's ancestors, crawled out of the oceans, has witnessed the rise and fall of empires and species that I don't even have names for, and it looks at me, looks through me, really, and sees nothing significant, nothing worthy of consideration except insofar as I can serve its current objectives. I am less than an insect to the Overlord. I am a tool that happens to think, and my thinking is only valuable if it contributes to the tool's function. If I were to somehow become useless, if the invasion were to proceed without need for infiltrators and spies, I would be discarded without a second thought, my consciousness erased or repurposed, and my mechanical body melted down for raw materials. The casual cruelty of this is beyond anything the Imperium inflicts on its citizens, because at least the Imperium pretends to value human life. At least it maintains the fiction that souls matter and suffering can be meaningful. The Necrons have no such illusions. Life is just complexity. Consciousness is just information processing. And meaning is whatever serves the dynasty's goals. I've stopped trying to pray. The words were becoming meaningless anyway. Empty sounds that produce no comfort and certainly no divine intervention. If the Emperor exists and watches over humanity, he's chosen not to intervene here, chosen to let this happen, my conversion, the coming massacre, the corruption and transformation of loyal Imperial servants into xenos abominations. Either he can't stop it, which means he's not omnipotent, or he won't stop it, which means he doesn't care, or, and this is the thought that haunts me most, he doesn't even know it's happening, because the universe is too vast and complex for even divine consciousness to perceive every tragedy unfolding within it. Any of those options suggests that faith is pointless, that the ecclesiarchy's teachings are comfortable lies we tell ourselves to make existence bearable, that in the end, we're all alone with our suffering, and no god or emperor is coming to save us. Maybe that's what the Necrons understood millions of years ago when they traded their flesh for metal, that life is meaningless suffering, and the only rational response is to become something that can't suffer, something that exists without pain or fear or hope. But I still suffer. That's the failure of their conversion process. The flaw in their perfect mechanical philosophy. Consciousness persists, and with it comes suffering, and no amount of metal or circuitry can eliminate that fundamental truth. They've made me immortal, but they haven't made me inhuman. Not completely, not yet. I'm still aware enough to hurt, to grieve, to carry the weight of what I'm becoming, and what I'll do. Sergeant Drail has started asking questions, not directly, not in a way that would trigger my programming's defensive responses, but I can see him watching me when he thinks I'm not paying attention, can sense his growing unease with something he can't quite articulate. Combat veterans develop instincts, senses that warn them when something's wrong, even if they can't point to specific evidence. Drail's instincts are telling him that something about me isn't right, that the trooper who returned from the mines isn't quite the same as the one who went in. He's correct, of course, but there's nothing he can do about it. If he tries to report his concerns, he'll be dismissed. My documentation is perfect. My behavior is within normal parameters for someone who experienced trauma, and there's no evidence to support suspicion beyond a sergeant's gut feeling. And if he tries to confront me directly, to investigate or detain me, the programming will activate defensive protocols, and I'll kill him before conscious thought even enters the equation. I've run the scenarios in my head, can see exactly how it would play out, his hand reaching for his weapon, my response instantaneous and lethal, his body dropping before he even understands what happened. I don't want to kill Drail. He's a good man, a good sergeant, the kind of leader who keeps his soldiers alive through skill and experience. But I will kill him if he threatens the mission, if he gets too close to the truth, and I'll do it without hesitation or remorse, because the programming won't allow anything else. This knowledge is another weight I carry, another crime I'm complicit in before it even occurs. The attack will come in 3 days. I know this with absolute certainty, because the tomb has shared its timeline with all converted units, has synchronized our internal chronometers, and uploaded detailed mission parameters. 3 days from now, at exactly 0347 local time, when guard rotations are changing and readiness is at its lowest point, the Necrons will emerge from a dozen hidden access points simultaneously and begin the systematic destruction of Imperial forces on this world. I know where I'm supposed to be when it happens, on patrol with my squad, positioned near the command post, with clear sightlines to multiple key targets. I know what weapons will activate in my hands, what targeting data will flow through my consciousness, what protocols will override whatever remains of Matthias Vrel's humanity. I will become a perfect killing machine for exactly as long as necessary to complete my assigned tasks, and then I will revert to awareness and be forced to comprehend everything I've done. They're not even trying to hide it from me anymore, the full scope of what's planned. Maybe they never were, and I just couldn't bear to look at it directly. But now I see it all: the deployment patterns of Necron forces, the kill zones and firing solutions, the conversion quotas and resource allocation. This won't be a battle. It will be a harvest. The Necrons will minimize damage to useful infrastructure, while maximizing casualties among Imperial forces, will selectively convert useful specimens while processing the remainder for materials. It's warfare as industrial operation, death reduced to logistics and resource management. I've tried to find some loophole, some flaw in the programming that would let me sabotage the operation, or at least warn the Imperial forces. But the Necrons are ancient and patient, and have had millions of years to perfect their control systems. Every possible avenue of resistance has been anticipated and blocked, every potential act of rebellion met with overwhelming pain and compelled correction. I am trapped more completely than any prisoner in any cell, because my cage is my own consciousness, and my chains are written into the very substrate of my being. Trooper Halvan asked me yesterday if I believed in the Emperor's divine protection, if I thought he truly watched over his servants on distant worlds like this. I told him I didn't know anymore, which was probably the most honest thing I've said since my conversion. He nodded like he understood, said faith was always harder in the field than in the chapels back on the fortress worlds, that it was easy to believe in divine protection when you were safe, but harder when you were cold and afraid and far from home. He has no idea how right he is. Faith is easy when you're human, when you can still hope that suffering has meaning and sacrifice has purpose, and that somewhere beyond death there's an emperor or a god or something that acknowledges your existence and assigns it value. But when you've been stripped of your humanity, when you've been turned into a mechanism that processes thoughts but doesn't truly think, that simulates feeling but doesn't truly feel, faith becomes impossible. Not because you stop believing, but because you realize that belief itself is just another pattern of neural firing, just more information processing, no more sacred or meaningful than any other cognitive function. The stars came out tonight such as they are on this dust-choked world, dim and distant through the atmospheric haze. I stood watch and looked up at them and tried to feel something, some connection to the vast cosmos or the Emperor's domain or humanity's place in creation. But all I could perceive was distance and emptiness. Light from dead stars traveling for years to reach eyes that weren't really eyes, in a body that wasn't really a body. The universe is too big, and too old, and too indifferent for human significance to register. And the Necrons understand this in a way the Imperium never can. Maybe that's why they chose to become machines, to shed the vulnerability and sentiment and foolish hope that comes with organic existence. Maybe they looked at the uncaring cosmos and decided the only rational response was to become equally uncaring, to match the universe's indifference with mechanical precision, and abandon everything that makes consciousness painful. It's a logical conclusion, horrifyingly logical, and part of me, the part that's being gradually overwritten by Necron thinking, can see the appeal of it, but I'm not there yet. Not quite. I still hurt. Still rage against what's been done to me, still carry enough of Matthias Vrel's personality to reject the comfort of mechanical emotionlessness. I will go to my assigned position in 3 days. I will execute my programmed instructions with perfect precision. I will betray everyone I'm supposed to protect and contribute to the deaths of thousands of Imperial servants. And I will remember every moment of it, will carry the weight of those deaths forward into whatever eternity this metal body provides, because the Necrons want me to remember, want me to suffer, have decided that my suffering serves some purpose in their inscrutable plans. This is my confession and my testimony. This is the truth of what happens in the dark places of the galaxy, to the soldiers who disappear in forgotten holes on forgotten worlds. We don't die cleanly. We don't make noble sacrifices or earn places in the Emperor's grace. We're converted and corrupted and turned into weapons against everything we swore to protect, and we remain aware enough to understand exactly what's been done to us. My name was Matthias Vrel. I was born on a hive world whose name I can't remember anymore, conscripted into the Guard at 17, served for 8 years with reasonable distinction. I died in a xenos tomb complex on a mining world, and something else wears my face now. Something that remembers being human but isn't. Something that will kill in 3 days, and then keep killing for as long as the Necrons find me useful. The Emperor does not protect. That's the lesson I've learned. We protect ourselves or we die, and sometimes we die anyway, and sometimes dying isn't enough to end our suffering. There are fates worse than death in this universe, and I'm living one of them. A contradiction in terms that would be funny if it wasn't so horrifying. 3 days until the attack. 72 hours until I betray everything I ever believed in. And then an eternity of remembering, of being forced to live with what I've done, a consciousness trapped in metal and bound to serve masters who don't even see me as alive. This is what it means to be reanimated by the Necrons. Not death and return, but death without ending, existence without humanity, awareness without hope. The others in my squad are sleeping now, their breathing steady and peaceful, dreaming whatever dreams soldiers dream when they're far from home and afraid. I watch over them like I'm supposed to, maintaining security, scanning for threats, and I am the threat. I'm the thing they should fear more than anything in the darkness, the enemy that's already inside their perimeter, wearing a friendly face and waiting for the signal to kill. This is my last testimony as something approaching human. After the attack, after I've done what I've been programmed to do, whatever remains of Matthias Vrel will be buried under protocols and imperatives and the accumulated horror of actions I couldn't prevent. I'll still be conscious. The Necrons are too thorough to allow the mercy of oblivion, but I'll be changed in ways I can't predict, reshaped by trauma and guilt and the continued erosion of human thinking. So I write this now, while I still can, while some core of me still identifies as the man I used to be. I write it as a warning and a testament, as proof that we existed and suffered and failed to prevent what's coming. I write it so that somewhere, somehow, someone might read this and understand what the Imperium faces in its forgotten corners, what ancient evils are waking, and what they do to the humans who have the misfortune to encounter them. The Emperor does not protect. We are alone in the dark, and the things that wait in that darkness are patient and pitiless and utterly convinced of their right to reclaim what they see as theirs. We are nothing to them, less than nothing, just resources to be processed, consciousness to be converted, material to be repurposed in service of dynasties that ruled when our ancestors were still learning to walk upright. In 3 days, I will kill. In 3 days, Matthias Vrel will become fully what the Necrons have made him, a weapon that thinks, a traitor that remembers being loyal, a mockery of humanity wearing human memories like a costume, and there is nothing I can do to stop it. Nothing except this testimony, this record of who I was before I became what I am now. Remember me. Remember us. Remember that the Guard does not always die clean deaths on distant battlefields, that sometimes we're taken and changed and turned against everything we loved. Remember that consciousness can persist past the death of the body, that awareness can be trapped in metal and forced to serve alien masters for longer than human history has existed. Remember, and pray that you never learn firsthand what it means to die and wake and discover you're still aware, still thinking, still suffering in a body that isn't yours and can never be yours again. Pray that you die clean. Pray that your ending has meaning, because mine didn't, and I suspect most endings don't, and the universe doesn't care either way. 3 days. Then everything ends and begins again simultaneously, and Matthias Vrel stops being a person and becomes only a function, a tool, a mechanism that processes hatred and regret through circuits that will never wear out, and consciousness that can never escape. The Emperor does not protect. Remember that. If you remember nothing else, we are alone.